Hey, welcome back to Between the Sheets. We're going to have a fun episode today. I have a guest who I connected with on Instagram, which is such a fun way to meet people and connect over these fun topics that we have. So I have Jamie Azar here with us today. She's a relationship and intimacy coach, an educator, and a whole bunch of things. So I'm going to let her introduce herself, but I'm so excited. Thank you for being here, Jamie.
Thank you for having me, Stephanie. I love your show. I'm excited to be here and get into our conversation today. Thanks for the warm welcome and introduction. And I am a sex certified relationship and intimacy coach and owner of Erotic Expressions. And a lot of the work that I do centers around helping people turn shame off and
Mm,
turn pleasure on and
yeah.
redefine sex, relationships, and intimacy beyond norms and binaries and expectations and pressure.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
That's
that's where
awesome.
I like
That's
to live. And as
that's a
mentioned, I
lot.
love Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you
And
didn't just
yeah,
like take on like a simple topic. You just like went full bore.
right, right. But I find that that's, we have a lot of history, right?
Yeah.
People carry a lot of history and narratives, and there's a lot of scripts we've internalized, and there's a lot of conditioning, right? So there's a lot of work to do in this space. So it's a privilege to enter in, with people into these, tender places
Yeah.
and get curious and compassionate and really think about, okay, how do we cultivate more genuine and authentic pleasure in our lives with ourselves or in
Yeah.
our relationships, right? In the bedroom. So it's
Yeah.
it's an exciting journey.
I love that you say curiosity and compassion. It's one of my favorite things about this area that we're dealing with sex and sexuality because I've had we spoke about this before we jumped on today, but I've had people, who don't necessarily want to listen to every episode because the topic doesn't necessarily resonate with them or, a style of relationship doesn't necessarily resonate with them. But my goal is like let's have the conversations. Just because you are a monogamous person and have no interest in non monogamy, I think it's still interesting to understand the conversation, the terms, the connection that people can have, and then that compassion piece. So please don't feel like nervous to talk to me about things because I have compassion. And I think the more that we can get people on board with that mentality, the more accepting people will be, the more that we're not going to give shame and all of these other things ground that we've given for so many years.
I love what you said, really. And I'm so passionate about the
Mhm.
education piece as well, right? Like the open mindedness and willingness to, again, expand and be open to what we don't know,
Yep.
right? And we don't know what we don't know. And like you said, we can absolutely be monogamous and apply certain non-monogamous frameworks to
Yep.
those monogamous relationships, right? Or
Hmm.
maybe along the way we discover a new term, right? Or
Yep.
a community that shares similar interests or values for us, or we, right, feel a little confused about our sexual
Yep.
orientation or identity, right? And with education, it's like, oh my gosh, we can go on that journey of self discovery. We can find belonging and community
Hmm.
with others, gain more self awareness, and allow ourselves to be expansive,
Yeah.
right? And again, we don't know how we might change or what
Yeah.
desires might evolve later in life, or right, I'm a big
Yeah.
proponent of really accepting and embracing fluidity,
Yeah.
right? And that can be in our desire, sexuality, expression. And so absolutely that education piece and getting curious and, like you said, compassionate. And
Yeah.
it can be really difficult in the land of self-compassion, right? Like
Yeah.
I heard you say, I'm compassionate, right? And as practitioners, we can cultivate that compassion and share that space.
Hmm.
And I'm also like, how does self-compassion exist, right? For
Yes.
clients? And like what role does that play in your life? And for me, that's one of the greatest antidotes to shame.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. And you do quite a bit of work with shame, right? And helping people break through that.
I do. And I feel like that's generally kind of one of the first places I start.
Hmm.
A lot of people ask me about the name of my business, Erotic Expressions. And so I
Yeah.
really like incorporating the idea of the erotic into my work. And I absolutely cannot claim ownership over this idea. I have to give homage and credit to Audre Lorde,
Mhm.
who kind of birthed this idea and espoused the idea of the erotic. And one of her most famous essays is the uses of the erotic. The erotic is power. And what I'm a former English teacher. I don't think I shared that with you, but I might get a little nerdy on some literature or
Yeah.
poetry along the way in my work or art. But what I really loved about her ideas, and they are very much a part of my work, is just thinking of the erotic as a creative power,
Ooh,
not necessarily just a like pornographic or
yeah.
sexual power or force, right? It can exist in our creativity. It can
Mm,
exist in shared connection with others, right? It can exist in shared joy, which can help us understand ourselves and others and break down barriers, right?
yeah.
And then encourage others, right, to have these rights to passion and pleasure and safety in their bodies and in community. And so yeah, that's very much a part of my work, is how
Yeah.
do we look at the erotic and pleasure again as more expansive, beyond sexual, beyond the pornographic, quote unquote, and in this
Yeah.
artistic way and creative way, right? Where we're really able to, and like she uses a couple examples in her essay, like whether it's dancing, building a
Mm,
bookcase, writing a poem, right? Like just knowing that we are capable and have this capacity for immense and deep feeling, and all
mm-hmm.
of that can be eroticized and used as power. So that very much informs the framework of my work. And I find that kind of one of the places to start is first looking at what role does shame play, right,
Yeah.
in our relationship with our pleasure, our eroticism, our beliefs around sex and
Mm-hmm.
sexuality. And like we said, let's get curious and compassionate there so that we can
Yeah.
move into more expansive expression and pleasure and joy.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the creativity side of it because erotica, our sexuality, there is so much space for creativity there, whether it's what position you want to try tonight, what role do you want to play. I mean, it's sexy to be creative.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes. And I think, one of the other pieces I like to work with folks is really getting into that piece of fun and play, right?
Mhm.
And we know there's so much pressure when it comes to sex, right? People have these expectations and these shoulds, and a lot of us might be having sex we don't necessarily enjoy, right? And I know for a lot of generally cisgendered heterosexual
Mhm.
women, right, feel sometimes like sex becomes a duty and a
Yeah.
chore, right? And so like very much, how do we start, once we start unpacking that shame,
Mhm.
start reframing some of our ideas and values, right, around sex, and
Yeah.
start questioning, like, are we having fun? Like, are we
Right.
enjoying the sex we're having? Like you said, like being playful, getting silly can be hot and sexy too. Like, how
Yeah.
do we make space for that and embrace it? And embrace it, right?
Yes.
And I think that's one of the best parts of this journey too, is like empowering people to step
Yeah.
into, like you said, whether it's an alter ego or a character or a scene, right?
Mhm.
We're co-creating with other people, just finding that the fun and
Yeah.
playfulness and childlike delight, right, in our
Yes.
expression.
Yeah, I think it's so important, and for a lot of people, the shame goes back to childhood because we were raised in a purity culture. You were really raised in a religion that you don't touch anything until you're married. You don't touch yourself, that's a sin, so there's a lot that goes into becoming shameful of things. And so to unpack that and rewind and then rewire our brains to not only be okay with sex, but to celebrate it and to be creative with it. That's a lot of work you got to do with some people.
It is. And it's a lot of work I do on myself, right? And
Yeah.
I continue to do, and I don't absolve myself from the work that I encourage other people to do, right? And
Oh no, I've got plenty to do too.
absolutely. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. The work is never done, right? But
Never.
absolutely what you're saying, that process of unlearning, and
Yes.
I always like to acknowledge that it can be really destabilizing for people, right? Like you said, if
Mhm.
we're coming from a purity culture background or upbringing, or we grew up around homophobia, or
Mhm.
growing up in the South, right, or wherever, like our geographic location or familial values, like you
Yeah.
said, like these roots can be so expansive of where this shame comes from, and not to mention it can live in our bodies, right,
Mm.
too, so much. And I think that's a really important part of the work, and where pleasure can be healing. Again, an antidote, right? Is that like our body remembers, right? And
Yeah.
our body holds on to that. And so how do we offer our body corrective experiences and also use pleasure for healing
Mhm.
and teaching our bodies, hey, it's safe, right? It's safe to be here.
Yeah.
It's safe to be me. Like I can give myself permission, right? To let go or have fun or be silly or try something new, right? Or do this on my own terms.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's so amazing. I actually had a conversation with my boyfriend earlier today. I called him and I said, I was just processing this thing that happened the other night with us. And I want to thank you for allowing me to feel so safe because I got to have this conversation with you that in previous relationships would have sparked fights or whatever. And we had a conversation. There was no shame. There was no questioning or, well, let's figure this out, whatever. It was just pure conversation with support. And I was like, this is what safety feels like. This is amazing. So, yeah, to be able to give that not only to your partner, but to a friend, a family member, someone who is going through something different than you or is just evolving into who they truly are, to be able to be that place of safety for someone else is amazing. So I love that you can do that for your patients and clients and things. What are some tips that you can share with people who haven't worked with you yet on kind of processing some of that shame or starting to move through it?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it starts again with that, like asking ourselves those questions. And it might be, I do a lot of work with the body and
Mhm.
somatically with folks. And I even find that a lot of folks that come to me have maybe done a lot of work and years in therapy and are looking to kind of take that next step. And they're feeling like, okay, I've talked about all this, right? But it's
Mhm.
still living in my body. And so, getting really curious about some of the somatic and tendencies around whatever those sensations or feelings that come up,
Mhm.
or the conversations we have with our partner, and learning to kind of sit with that. And I know even the term sit with it can be kind of ambiguous and vague, right? And that might mean sit, like getting curious, asking questions. It
Mhm.
might be using art as a form of expression, like journaling it out, incorporating mindful practices, using mindful movement or yoga,
Mhm.
meditation, any of nature, right, can be a
Yeah.
sanctuary for people. I know it's one for me. Tuning into, again, pleasure, right,
Mhm.
beyond the bedroom. And we're not just focusing on what we don't want there, right? The
Mhm.
shame, the trauma, the fear, the conditioning. We're also replacing it, right? That's
Yeah.
that corrective experience. So feeding our bodies with pleasure, and that can be experienced, right, in the food
Mhm.
that we eat, right?
Yes.
The relationships we have. I really like what you shared about creating that safety
Mhm.
for not just our romantic partners, not just ourselves, but friends and family members. And I think also, taking time to nurture platonic
Mhm.
relationships too. I think our society is so quick to fall into a mononormativity where romance or sex is a default or more important than platonic relationships and friendships. And
Mhm.
so really encouraging people to holistically, like, cultivate their ecosystems,
Yeah.
right, with their bodies, and kind of like that wheel, right, with like spirituality, friends, like it's all connected,
Yeah.
right? And so kind of looking at all those places that shame might show up, right, because
Mhm.
it's not just in the bedroom. We might experience that in other contexts. And also,
Sure.
so how is this showing up in those other places too? And what's the common root, like what's the
Yeah.
common limiting belief or value, right? Or whose voice is this? Like, at
Mm.
what point did I learn this, or did someone teach me, right? Or
Yep.
what is my inner critic or judge or censor trying to reveal to me? And what do I actually know to be true? And
Mm.
how do I start living in that truth? Right. And
Yeah.
it's a practice, like we said, right? Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't happen overnight.
Right, but it's powerful. I mean, that is
Right.
powerful to sit there and say, "Where did this actually come from? Like, why do I have this belief?" And like you said, sit with it, figure it out, and then, is that the truth? Is that the truth that I believe, or was that person's truth that said that to me? And that's such a unique way to look at things and a way to really start to peel back those layers and say, is this something that I own? Is this how I feel about it? Or is this what someone else thought and told me I should also think?
Yeah, when you say that, it makes me think of kind of the simultaneous process of like rejecting, right?
Hmm.
Kind of rejecting these norms and shoulds and binaries and all of this expectations that don't resonate with us,
Right.
and then reclaiming, right, the things that we want to be
Yeah.
a part of those narratives or beliefs or practices or rituals that we
Hmm.
have sexually, relationally, or just on our own, right? I don't
Yeah.
even say just because it minimizes it, right? Like
Right.
our relationship with self, I think, is the most important, right?
Yes.
At the end of the day, it starts with us and that self intimacy
Hmm.
and spending that time with ourselves, and also creating excitement within that. I think for clients, right?
Hmm.
Like it can be really fearful to be like, oh my gosh, right? Like all the unlearning and the
Hmm.
shifting and the healing that happens. And right, we sometimes feel really empowered, other times we're falling apart, and like
Yep.
just to make space for all of that and to know that like that is part of the work, that is part of the healing. And how do we honor that? Like,
Yeah.
how do we honor all of those baby steps we're taking every step of the way, and start celebrating our successes every time we choose to put ourselves first, every time we say no to
Hmm.
something without an excuse or apology, right? For
Yes.
people pleasers out there, like every time we can give an enthusiastic yes and enjoy the hell out of ourselves in that experience, right? Or whatever
Yep.
it is, just, and the more we lean into all of that, like I think the easier it is to see like and reject this no longer serves me, right? Because then we
Yes.
start we're like noticing the things that feel good and align with us. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, going off of this, one of the other things that I know that you talk about is reframing sex as playtime and fun and exciting and all these things. And so I think, as you're reframing these individual thought processes and shameful things, being able to flip that and say, well, it's not shameful to touch myself. I can have a lot of fun touching myself. I can enjoy that pleasure. I can enjoy the sensations. I can enjoy all this and kind of having some fun with it. I really like that. How did that kind of come about as far as like that particular reframing into more of like a playfulness?
honestly, what's coming up for me is just, I think, more of my own, right, personal reframing. And as I've, embarked on my own journey into sexology, and
Mhm.
just kind of similar to what you shared at the beginning, right? Like the access to education and possibilities and learning about different things that we think may not align with us, or that's not for us, right? And
Mhm.
then we decide, hey, maybe I'm open to this, or might get curious or explore something. And
Yeah.
so for me, I've always been a very playful person. And when I think of play, I think of doing something for the sake of doing it, outside of a
Mhm.
goal, outside of an outcome or expectation, right? We
Yeah.
are in the moment experiencing joy and delight in presence, right? And
Yes.
in pleasure. And to me, if we can reframe sex as play, and center pleasure,
Mhm.
which is more of a state of feeling good, over desire, which is more of a state of wanting,
Yes.
yearning, longing, kind of like I've got to have it, but I don't have it, which can
Yeah.
even be a little like, that can be arousing, but also frustrating, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah. So just kind of allowing sex to be more of a circular model than the linear model, right? Like
Yeah.
very scripted, the relation sex escalator, I think some people call it, right?
Yeah.
Like the kissing, oral sex, the penetration,
Right.
orgasm, and maybe some sleep and ice cream or
Yeah.
something, right? Or
Yeah.
some, and
Absolutely.
aftercare, whatever
Right?
your form of aftercare is.
Yes, which is one of my favorite things that monogamous heterosexual couples need to take from the people in the lifestyle, non-monogamous, whatever, because aftercare is so important and it is skipped over by the vast majority of people. And it is the most lovely thing when you are laying there afterwards, like, how was that? What did you like? What did you not like? And just that it's so great. I love aftercare.
Yeah, and I think again, like it sounds like, for some people, like you just shared, right? It might be like reflecting on the experience. Like,
Yeah.
how was that for you? What did you enjoy? And it's different for everyone,
Yep.
right? What they'll need after sex or intimacy or play. And so absolutely, like I encourage my clients and people to have that conversation with
Yes.
their partners if they haven't. Like, hey, like what types what are your needs firstly, and also are
Right.
there routines or rituals we might want to incorporate? And right, for some people they want to have those maybe more reflective conversations, and then for others they are like want to go shower or
Right.
bathe, or like they just need some space, right? And
Yeah.
again, it's like we might have to have those conversations, or it's useful to have those conversations
Right.
again so people are aware there's consent, right? There's
Yep.
again that safety beyond the act of intimacy or sex
Yeah.
itself. And again, that aftercare could extend for even days after, right?
Yeah.
If for some people that are in DS relationships, right? Or
Mhm.
depending on the type of play or the relationship you have with that person that
Yeah,
you're
it's
in.
awesome. And the other thing that I like that you brought up is pleasure, right? So I love focusing on pleasure versus penetration or climax because those are great things. They're great goals. But they're not necessarily gonna happen every time, nor do they need to happen every time. Intimacy is so many different layers, and, because of what I do as a urologist, I have a lot of men who have erectile dysfunction. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the meds are on board, sometimes they're not. And so really taking this PNV equals intimacy off the charts and just focusing on that pleasure piece. What do you like? Do you want a massage tonight? Do you want to, I don't know, play with different fabrics and see what feels good against your skin? Do you want to just do oral sex tonight? And really bringing it down to what feels good for you today in this moment, just being pleasure minded. I love that focus.
Yeah, and I love what you said is just being open to recentering that
Mhm.
and communicating about it with our partners, because I know for a lot of people that's a journey in and
Yeah.
of itself, right? Living in a capitalistic society where we are grinding and burnout is glorified, right? And
Mhm.
rest is villainized, and self-care has just kind of the ideas of it, right, are sometimes kind of exploited, and
Yeah.
people just don't give themselves permission to rest or to
Mhm.
play or to be in pleasure. And that can be anything they want it to be, right? As long as everyone's consenting and glad
Yep.
to be there and it feels good. Right.
Mhm.
And again, like you said, it doesn't have to involve sex, right? It
Yep.
could be cuddling. It could be creating an artistic masterpiece together, taking a hike and having a picnic, right? Like
Mhm.
you had said, that intimacy can be so vast, and
Mhm.
I absolutely align with that. And intimacy is a spectrum, and we don't have to, like you said, center penetration sex at all. We don't even have to center romanticism in our relationships if we
Mhm.
don't want to, right? And honoring platonic relationships and everyone's way of self definition in the way that they feel best with
Mhm.
whomever they decide to connect with.
Yeah. And throughout our lives, throughout our relationships, we're going to have feelings of needing more intimacy, less intimacy, high stress and, at work or young kids for a while, maybe reconnecting when you're in empty nesting or going through hormonal shifts for both men and women, cancers, different things. So it's going to vary throughout the life. And so having an ongoing conversation with your partner and continuously pulling back those levels of shame that come up that you're like, okay, you're coasting along doing well. And then all of a sudden you get diagnosed with breast cancer and you need to have a mastectomy. And now you have a whole nother mind thing to go through because, well, now I don't have breasts. Does that not make me a woman? Does that not make me sexy? Do I need to? So you're going to continuously go through different phases of life. And so if you can get these for your thoughts, then that will serve you well as you go forward and bam, life hits you with something new.
Yeah, and as you were sharing that, I was feeling this, feeling that some people can feel almost betrayed by their bodies, right? Like you
Mhm.
shared some of the folks that you work with in your clinic, that the men that are experiencing erectile
Mhm.
variability or AD, and women going through menopause and perimenopause, right? And all hormonal changes
Mhm.
and you name it. We might have other disabilities or accidents, right? And all of it. And I think not only the reframing, but again, being compassionately with your body
Mm.
and, right, continuing to nurture that relationship in all seasons of its life, right? Because it's going to change.
Yeah.
And again, it's so easy to be ashamed of the way it either is or isn't functioning. Again,
Mhm.
pressure for men to be have a walking hard on or be
Right.
expected to perform immediately, or for women
Yep.
to always be wet and aroused and ready to be penetrated, quote unquote, or whatever it is, right? And
Yeah.
acknowledging again, hey, our bodies can be different in different seasons. And again, that's where that creativity comes in,
Mhm.
because there's always a way that we can find pleasure
Yeah.
in new or familiar ways, depending on how our body is changing.
Yeah. What are some of those ways that we can kind of nurture that erotic creativity and kind of tap into that creativity side?
For me, I think it really comes down to ritual,
Hmm.
coming down like really thinking about the types of rituals and routines and practices,
Mhm.
right, to incorporate into your life. And that's going to look different for everyone, right? For me, it's morning meditation in the form of journaling, right? And
Okay.
just kind of doing more of an energetic clearing on the page. It's prioritizing time with my body, moving, dancing, celebrating it,
Mhm.
right? Like masturbating, having
Yep.
sex, going out in nature, getting connected to communities too, right? We don't heal in isolation. We
Mhm.
we heal in community, right? So again, nurturing platonic relationships, finding new activities to share with others, and celebrating that shared connection and joy. It might be taking up a new hobby, right?
Mm.
Even something that, again, brings that aliveness to you. It could be writing, it could be baking, it could be painting again,
Mhm.
it could be learning a new instrument, right? Or picking up an instrument you used to play again. I think it's really about having a beginner's mind
Mm.
and allowing yourself to be open to your source again of that erotic creativity, that
Yeah.
that unique fingerprint that we have for everyone, and allowing that to birth itself in all facets of our life
Yeah.
for it to change.
Yeah, I love that. I think, giving yourself permission to explore your different fantasies, your different ideas, and whether that's like for me, my nature place is being by the ocean or a large body of water. That's where I feel at most at peace. That's where I can process things the best. And so I can just picture myself like sitting on the beach and like, all right, today I'm going to think about what kinds of things bring me pleasure and where do I want to take my pleasure and how do I want to start, interacting and being erotic and all of these things. And I can just picture myself sitting there by the ocean and doing this and having all these kids playing around me and people over there reading their book and that person's flying their kite and I'm just sitting here thinking about sex in my head and what do I want to do next and how do I want to grow and what am I interested in? And I think that's such an amazing thing to kind of start to think through yourself and figure out your own personal feelings on things. And then if you have a partner, take it to them and be like, I was thinking I might really like to try X, Y, and Z. Or this weekend, instead of having our traditional make out, have sex, have orgasm, go to sleep for the night, let's just have oral sex. Or let's have a hot makeout session on the couch like when we were teenagers. And then just if it evolves into sex, great. If it doesn't, let's just have that fun part. I think it's so fun to figure out where you're at and then have a partner that you can kind of like talk through and be like, "What do you think? Now what do you think?" Like, and kind of build off of it with each other.
Oh, yeah. Imagination, fantasy, all of that can really enhance desire and arousal and
Mhm.
connection, like you're talking about intimacy. And I would even add that you don't necessarily even need a partner, right? We can get
Mhm.
really kinky with ourselves. We can do that with a partner. Again, it doesn't have to be sexual. We don't even have to act on our fantasies if we don't want to. So
Right.
I really like to emphasize that
Yep.
too, is just again to take away the pressure, right? Because some people really just like to live in their fantasy, and even talking about it can be really
Mhm.
hot with partners. And whether or not it becomes a reality or a behavior, great,
Yeah. Right.
but let's live here in this, like you're saying, the playful space, and
Yeah.
taking that time with self, right? And
Right.
maybe you're inspired by that ocean scene, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I love the ocean. So I was totally there with you, right? And maybe we're inspired by that, and we get inspired with fantasy and desire and
Mhm.
creativity. We take that back to our partners, right? So absolutely, like developing that relationship and
Yeah.
committing to that quality time with self can absolutely like enhance the relationship. And we can
Yeah.
absolutely, I love the realm of fantasy, and talking about it again can be so hot without even
Yes.
acting on it. So to
Absolutely.
normalize that. Yeah.
Yes. Now there are some people who really haven't ever even gotten into fantasies or thought about that because of their levels of shame and you just don't do that and you just have regular sex and all of those things. How do you kind of help someone start to explore, or what kind of homework do you give them to start to learn about fantasies and figure out what they might even be interested in?
Yeah. So, of course, working through kind of the initial shame piece and destigmatizing fantasy in general, right?
Hmm.
Like, there might be this idea that like your if you're fantasizing, you're like sex crazed, compulsive, no,
Right.
like fantasy can be beautiful, it can be artistic, it's imagination, right? Our
Yes.
imagination can be, again, like the greatest root and foundation of all this creativity and desire and pleasure, right? We get imaginative with that,
Hmm.
right? And that's what makes the practices fun and worth doing. So,
Yeah.
absolutely, I think first destigmatizing, removing the shame, and then, hey, let's explore. So it might be reading erotica. It might be thinking about like, what are some really hot scenes or movies you've seen, right? Reflecting on what elements there are in that, right? That
Yep.
that make it really hot or sexy to you. Is there a certain like archetype or characterization or context or scene or act or behavior? Like,
Hmm.
cool, let's get curious around this, right? And maybe there's a element of dominance or power exchange. And
Hmm.
again, that can really unlock some interesting avenues and pathways for erotic creativity and exploration. Again, right? Like maybe someone finds, hey, I really love the idea of being dominant or submissive,
Yeah.
or kind of moving into more of a switchy realm, like in
Yep.
these identities. Again, stepping into an alter ego that we admire or create on our own, and using role play and
Mm.
erotic creativity to kind of embody these parts of ourselves that we may not give permission to be in
Yeah.
real life.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the erotic novels and things like that. I mean, and you can use porn for that as well in some cases. I always, just don't always go to porn is my thing. Like you want to experience erotica in multiple different ways. But I love the books because I'm a nerd like you, and I love reading and all of those things. So for me, language and picturing what these people are doing and hearing their interaction really speaks to me and allows me to be like, "Oh, I don't like the way they're talking," or "Oh my god, that's really hot," or whatever. And then I can see like, "Okay, maybe I do like a little bit of dominance," or maybe, "Oh my god, I am not a dominant. I only want to be a submissive," or like there's different things that you can really pick out that maybe in a different situation, like even watching a movie, those characters, they're portraying it the way they are wanting to portray it. Whereas when you read a book, you get to make it the way that you want it. And I think it's such a great way to explore some fantasies or even realize you have some fantasies.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love it. I ran an erotica book club,
Yeah,
and I found myself, yeah, I like was getting into the short stories, and
that's
I'm like, oh, this
awesome.
is so, of course I'm laughing at some of them
Right,
because there's
right.
elements of humor. But what I loved about them, it's so funny. I'm like, man, what did I love most? It wasn't even like necessarily the sexy scenes. It was like these moments of the characters, generally women, just being fully in their power and pleasure and
Yes.
going exactly after what they want, like in a very unapologetic
Right.
way, and always like reclaiming a part of them that was lost, right?
Yep.
Or going after something they've always wanted or hadn't given themselves permission to. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's great, to find something that, again, you, like you said, resonates, or that gives us a new idea or might inspire us or
Yeah.
just create some kind of curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So let's say you start to figure out a fantasy that you like, things like that, and you're like ready to talk to your partner about it. How do you do that? How do you ask for what you want or kind of have that conversation? What are some suggestions you have?
Yeah, great question. I always encourage folks to start out by just scheduling a time or creating a
Mm,
container before going into the conversation, right? And that
okay.
can be a little, that even that process or preparing for that can take some time for folks, right? Like they can, again, feel some shame. They can be fearful of rejection or maybe not being received by their partner. Maybe it's something they've never shared, or they is a little taboo, for example. And so
Mm-hmm.
just kind of working through that piece initially, and then, yeah, taking the time to schedule. You might say, hey, really been thinking about some ways we might improve intimacy or become more explorative or curious together. Would you be open to having that conversation
Mhm.
either now or at another time that's convenient for you? Or can we put a time, over the next couple days on the calendar? And so, yeah, that time might be then, it might be in the
Yeah.
future. And absolutely, like you had a great little model of that, right? Is just sharing, hey, I read something in a book, or I saw something in a movie, or I listened
Mhm.
to this podcast and they were talking about X, Y, and Z, and just really got me curious. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I'd be curious or interested to maybe try bondage sometime.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts or feelings around that? Like, what comes up for you as I share this with you?
Yeah, and I love that kind of talking about it outside of when you're actually having sex. Probably would not go over super well if you were like, "Hey, I just watched The Hunting Wives and the sheriff got pegged and I'm going to try pegging you," and you're like in the middle of having sex and they're like, "Whoa, like,
Right.
time out, maybe we should talk about this."
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would like absolutely what you said. Like I always encourage my folks and clients to have those conversations outside of the bedroom
Yes.
beforehand when people are regulated and open to receiving that. And again, within creating the container, even maybe saying to your partner initially, like, hey, I don't have any expectations for us to act on this.
Mhm.
There's no pressure on us doing anything. I just would love to share if you're open to that and hear your thoughts on it. Right. And
Yeah.
taking away the expectation of, again, a goal or an outcome or an action around that,
Mhm.
because I think that can put pressure on the receiver, right? Or the recipient of that
Yeah.
information. So gentleness, right?
Yeah.
Sensitivity, preparing that container. And we know, like, when you've been in a relationship with, your partner for longer, it might be easier to have those conversations where sex is just more ongoing and we're
Yes.
talking about our sex menu often and
Right.
planning, whatever, it looks different for everyone depending on where you're at and who you're with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such an important thing too. And each relationship, if you end that relationship and go on to another one, the way that you talked to that partner might not work for the next partner and etc. But I love what you said about just because you have a fantasy, you don't have to act on it. I think that's amazing because I personally think like the fantasy of being caught having sex in a public place is super hot. I don't ever actually want to be caught in a public place having sex. Like that would actually be a nightmare for me. But the idea of it is really hot and I love that fantasy, but I will never actually act on that because also my boyfriend is a police officer. So like that would be a really problematic thing for his career if we got caught doing something like that.
I'm like, my erotic creative imagination is already going all different ways over here, to be honest. But I'm like, but again, that like if I were working with clients like around that, I would say, man, what role might role play? You
Yes.
know,
Yes.
can we make space for that? Or again, we don't necessarily have to be out in nature taking this legitimate risk. Like, how
Right.
can we use imagination or maybe role playing to bring that fantasy to life again if they're interested in
Yeah.
acting, right? In
Yep.
acting on it or making it a behavior. But absolutely, right? We can still find great delight and relish and pleasure in a fantasy without it being a behavior action.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think it's so important. And to just say, like, because I'm thinking in a partnered situation right now, like, I have this fantasy. I'm totally okay if we don't play it out like in real life, but like, can we talk through it so I can see whether or not it really is a turn on for me or not? Because sometimes you think something is hot. And then as you actually get into it, you're like, I actually don't like this. I just like the idea of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that too, for the conversation being a way to
Hmm.
kind of test it out and gather data and clear
Hmm.
out any assumptions, and yeah, really really again get curious without
Yeah.
expectations around our relationship with that fantasy, and it might change, right? Be like, actually, maybe, maybe
Right.
I'm not into this, right? That's
Right.
okay too.
Yeah.
But what I love about what you're sharing is really, like, again, this final piece that I work on with my clients is sexual communication,
Uh-huh.
right? And that, like, how do we start finding our voices and really start asking for what we want?
Yeah.
And that is a skill and that's a practice, right? But that's one way that we can start reclaiming agency and start having the sex or pleasure or intimacy or relationships that we really want, right?
Yeah.
Because our partners aren't mind readers, right? And no one
Right.
is going to know what we want if we
Yes.
don't start asking for it ourselves, right? So, and that can be a lot. There can be a lot of work around that as
Oh,
well.
absolutely. I mean, I think it goes back to what you've been saying throughout this whole thing that it doesn't always just come down to sex. Like, if asking, or maybe it's saying no, no, I can't take that on. Yes, I can come to this, but I can't come to all three events. Or so being able to learn how to do that outside of the bedroom is tough to begin with. And so I think getting those practices in and learning to say, yes, no, this brings me pleasure, this doesn't bring me pleasure for regular everyday things is so essential because then you can start to incorporate it into the more intimate, taboo, difficult topics. And then your partner can come to you and say, hey, I have this fantasy. And you're like, okay. My feeling right off the bat is I'm open to talking about that fantasy, maybe, talking through it, but I'm not quite ready to explore it physically yet. And then, you can kind of like, gosh, I just think that's such a big deal to be able to learn how to say, yes, this brings me pleasure, or no, that doesn't, and stand firm in that.
Absolutely. Like checking in with internal consent and also
Hmm.
celebrating other people's yeses and their nos as
Yes.
well. Like thanking them, right? Because that can be difficult in a relationship as well, managing no.
Yep.
And right, that's a practice in of itself. And how do we start celebrating and thanking people for their no's, right? And celebrating them for trusting their own internal consent and practicing their
Yeah.
boundaries. Or maybe it's a yes or a yes and,
Hmm.
or yes and no, right? Maybe it's a
Right.
little bit of both. So
Yeah.
absolutely, and I love absolutely empowering people in that. In that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing, and what the work that you're doing is fabulous. This conversation has been amazing. So I
I
really appreciate you
enjoyed it
being here,
too.
Jamie.
Thank you so
Yes.
much for having me. I totally enjoyed this. Like, I just feel
Yes.
like my heart is feeling really good. I feel inspired and energized by the conversation, and it felt really natural. So I really appreciate you having my show and me on your show and making the space for this conversation.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I
It's
love
been such a
everything.
pleasure. Such a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anything that you want our audience to know about you, how to connect with you, what you offer, go ahead and give a plug.
Oh, thank you so much. You can head to my website, www.eroticexpressions.org. You can follow me on Instagram, where I'm most active, at Erotic Expressions EDU. And to be honest, I'm always doing something, not only coaching, but I host workshops, dance classes sometimes, seminars, group offerings, liberate. I've got 4-week program called Liberated that I offer. So there's just always something community. I host monthly relationship panels called Real Talk. It's a Q&A panel that's free every month for people to attend, where they can ask anonymous questions in advance and get advice and insight from diverse experts all across the field on everything related to sex, relationship, and intimacy. So really, it's just my goal to bring education to the people, right? And to make it
Yes.
accessible and sex positive and
Yeah.
fun, right? And to give people hope and possibility along the way. So
Yeah.
if any of that resonates, please don't ever hesitate to reach out, message me, email, call, all of it.
Awesome. And we will put all that in the show notes for you guys as well. So as you're driving around, you don't have to try and be typing this into your phone. You can hit the show notes later and scroll and find her. Jamie, thank you so much. This was an awesome conversation. I appreciate your work in this world and the positivity that you bring. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, have a great week and go have some fun between the sheets.